Alrighty, hello everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Just wanted to say a quick idea. Parshas balak. Very interesting. Few interesting insights over here. It says that Vayar balak ben tzipor is koshas eisal mari, and then it says Vayagur moyav mipnei ha'am me'oid ki ravhu. So it says they were Vayagar, which is Rashi here says Lashon Mayra, and then Vayakat May Mipnei Bnei Yisrael, and it says that Moav became their Vayakats, they became disgusted. So Rashi says over here Katsu v'chayehim, and Shaila really is what is the taich of the pasuk over here? The Vayagar Moav. In other words, you have the lashon of losagur mipnei ish. In other words, that there's this idea that you shouldn't be afraid. You shouldn't. But what is the specificity of the expression of the fear in terms of the idea of vayagar? Since we have yira, and we have pachad, and we have myra, and we have ema, we have many different words in the Torah that describe the terminology of someone being afraid or being in awe of. So the shaila is, what specifically is the lashon of Vayagar coming to do? And then also, what stam is the taich of Vayakats? In other words, Katsu b'chayim. It would seem to be that there is, we don't think of the idea of someone, if someone is scared of somebody, that he's Katsu b'chayim, he's like disgusted with his own life. That is not a normal response to a general sense of fear. So what is the taich of that point? And then the other ideas I want to focus on, really, and try to get more of a theme-based understanding of Bilam Harasha and what precisely he was trying to do over here. So Rashi says that, let's see what the pasuk says, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Balak sent to Bilam L'chana Ara li esal mazeh, and the lashon of Ara over here is to curse. In other words, you curse them. You should say something chas v'shalom negative should happen to them, something like that. And then when Bilam is talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, so Rashi says, kavali over here, zu kasha me arali, shuhu nokiv umufarish. The taich of the word kava means that the person is nokiv, he puts a hole, literally, in mufarish, and then he explicits what it is that he wants to happen. And that is expressed as well by the fact that V'gerashtiv, Rashi says, what Bilam meant, min ha'olam. Uvalak lamer al-gash min ha'aretz, ein v'agash al-asiyah ma'alai. And in Bilam, ha'yasayna am yaisami balak, says Rashi. Bilam had a greater hate for the Jewish people than Balak had. So, just, simply speaking, to understand what does it really mean? What does that mean to be koive, as opposed to just cursing? And Bishlama Balak, you understand there's a sense of resentment because he feels threatened. So if someone feels threatened by somebody else, so they resent the fact that that person is making them feel threatened. So you understand that he might be afraid, or he might come to hate the person whom he resents for threatening his existence. By Bilam, we don't find any reason that Bilam would be a son of Yisrael. Kosher more than Balak would be. So it's interesting to understand what is the simple basis of the idea that Bilam is a son of Yisrael. Meaning, where does that come from? There's no interface. There's no reason for him to be a son of Yisrael. So what does it really come from, the fact that he's a son of Yisrael? We know the famous medrash, it says that Bilam was also the one who gave the Eitzah to Paro to Meshabed the Jewish people, etc. So you see, there's a theme. Some say it's also Lavan, perhaps that ties in as well. But that is the other Shaila over here. And then, lastly, you have the famous Mishnah in Avos. The Mishnah in Avos says that so the Mishnah contrasts Bilam and Avinu, and Rashi throughout the parsha does this as well, in at least one place, but I think probably more. And there's some sort of idea that the Maisim of Avinu and what he did, the brachos that Hakadosh Baruch Hu gave to the Avos, were the shield mipenei, the curses of Bilam Harasha. So the shayla is, we want to get perhaps a general understanding. What is it exactly that Bilam Harasha is doing? What's the siva? What is the tetzah that he wants? What does he want? And how is it that he's going about accomplishing that tetzah, that result? So we'll start off. They're a bit of separate ideas, but give a taich for this, just because I think it's a fascinating concept. And that is that the lashon of vayagar, the root of the word is ger, and a ger is someone who is a foreigner. In other words, he doesn't belong where it is that he is, but rather he's staying. It's a temporary thing, like it says in the Haggadah, Lagursha, right? So, in other words, there's the idea that ger means that you're a temporary resident, and then you have from that kiravu, and then zvayakat ma'id mipnei Yisrael. So the depth of the concept l'chara is the following. That is that there is two types of fears that one could have of another person. There's one fear, which is a very simple fear of physical harm from that individual, and that situation does not lead to a vayagar. That is not a vayagar situation. That's not the type of fear. Perhaps it's pachad, perhaps it's general yira, perhaps, but it's not vayagar. What does vayagar mean? The taich over here of vayagar, moyav, is the idea that due to the accomplishment of Bnei Yisrael, like Rashi says over here, Amar elu shnei melachim sheinu v'tuchim aleim lo amdu b'fneihem anu alachas kama v'ama lefichach vayagar moyav. It's not much foolish in Rashi. So, in other words, the Moab nation had the two melachim, and the two melachim, they trusted them, they relied upon them as their sense of security, and once that was gone, there was the result of vayagar moyav. The result of vayagar moyav is the idea that a person becomes a ger within himself. What does that mean? That means that he is in a point of a reality in which he is internally displaced. That if you have a system or a manner of being or operation that you had for a very long time, and that gets pulled out from under you, you feel a complete sense of total displacement within yourself. You're a foreigner to yourself because the new circumstance which you find yourself in has gotten rid of something which you take for granted as part of the way that you view your own self. And although that is the simple level of that concept, the deeper level of the concept, and perhaps this can even be said within this Rashi, is that the bitachon and the malachim as far as Umayyah were concerned, not only did it represent an idea of these two people are very strong individuals, and therefore, it is, we rely upon them for our security, but rather it is the idea that the two Mulachim, as is well known, were Og Melech HaBashan and Sichon Melech HaMari. They, in stature, were giants. And the Gemara says that their baby carriages, their baby forms were 9 amos. So, I really want to add that up, but that's taller in their baby form than most adults. So, it's very clear that there is an idea that these two people, whether you take it literally, the parshas is that it's literal, and taka, that they were very, very large people. And therefore, it could represent, and you see this theme throughout the parsha as well, that there is the mechanism of the way that Yisrael accomplishes things, which is through their mouth, bepihem, and there is the mechanism of the way that the Umas Ha'olam accomplishes things, and that is through their cherev, through their sword. And that's not simply a fact of the matter, a way to describe the way that the Umas Ha'olam actually accomplish things. It is their very essence. In other words, they base themselves on the concept that might equals right. The fact that I am stronger than you, and the fact that I have the ability to force you to do something due to weaponry or size or whatever it is, means that I am stronger. It means that I do deserve to be in the number one place. That is the inyan of achar b'chasichya. It's not simply a factual inyan, it's a hashkafa inyan. In other words, the etzem concept is that might does make right. And that's 100% still true b'zman in terms of America, etc., etc. So, the side of the concept would be that the fact that the Jewish people were able to defeat these two Malachim, these giants, physical giants, whether they were, simply speaking, physical giants, and in the environment said that they were both Malachim Kashim, very extremely powerful physically themselves as well. The fact that these two people were taken down did not just represent the fact that the Moab nation no longer had security, and therefore they felt displaced in terms of the fact that they had nothing to rely on to make it so that they can be guaranteed safety, but it represented a clear vision of the falsity of the narrative of Al-Char B'Chasechia. In other words, that the fact that these two people were giants did not guarantee the fact that they're alive. In other words, I displayed to you that Al-Char B'Cha does not mean Sechia, and therefore the entire basis of the manner in which they added up reality has now been broken down and has now been demolished. And what that does is that accomplishes in a very deep sense a vayagar, a sense of geirus, of being foreign in your own essence, in your own way that you view and go about operating in reality. And that is why it leads to vayakat smayim mipnei bnei Yisrael. Right? That is the cheshbon over here. In other words, if a person represents a reality of an hashkafa which is completely contrary to the very basis of the way that I build my view on reality, and the person who has the contrary view is there, and his view has shown to have been successful, and it is showing to be successful, what that does is it makes it that I'm disgusted with my entire sense of self, because my sense of self is the way that I build out my view on life. And Memela, if I see that that's being broken down, that makes me katsu b'chayehem. That's what it does. It makes it that imamish a katsu b'chayehem is katz is a lashon of kates, which means it has an end, meaning that they imamish felt that their lives were over, that they had no sense of self, no shaychus to the reality of what they were, and that produces a feeling of disgust. And therefore, that is the geder of the sinna, which Balak has for the Jewish people. So he wants Vagar Shenu min haaretz. So the balak wants that. He no longer wants to be that the truth of this concept of Klal Yisrael and of koyach of peh. He doesn't want this to be in his face anymore. He doesn't want this to be posing a threat. So he goes to someone who, among the Umas Ha'olam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, granted one person prophecy, Bilam, and his koyach is in his peh, and that's what they consulted with the Midyanim, and therefore they now come with the koyach of the peh. And this is brought out by this Rashi as well over here, in this pasuk really, that it says Kolcho Chashor. It's Kol Moshe Ashor Melachich Ein By Bracha. The Mayav was saying now the Kahol Melachich is close to Yiseinu. I mean that they'll lick all of the surroundings, and there's not going to be bracha anymore. That's not such a weird pasuk. He's saying that the koyach of the bracha of the Umas Ha'olam comes from Al Char B'Chasichya. In other words, their bracha comes from that. If we have a opposing narrative and an opposing koyach that's ruling supreme, they will not have bracha, and that's true. It would only be within the new order, within the new perspective, and the new way that Metzius is unfolding that they would have been zeichet to bracha, but not mitzad the way that they themselves have been operating and viewing reality up until this point. So, Mimela, that's the pshat over there, and I think it's a very worthwhile insight. So going right over here, we have this idea of that Bilam wants to be koive, he wants to do chana kavali. So now we want to get an understanding, what does kava mean? What is this idea of noikev mufarish? So we have in the Torah an iser, and the iser of kililas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, cursing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in that, the lashon of the Torah is v'noikev shem Hashem moisimas ragom yigimuvo kol heida. And it says one who is nokev the name of Hashem moisimas. So the Rashi says that you're not chayav until you explicitly state the name, and you can't not mechal b'kinoi. So what that means is, let's see the Gemara. Rashi quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin says like this. It says that what does it mean that he's noikev as Hashem? It says here, it says the Mishnah, Amgadif and Echavich Yifras Hashem, Amr Yishem Karcha B'chayon Danan as Eden B'chinoi, Yake Yosi es Yosi. So Yosi is the name that the Gemara, the Mishnah is inserting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you don't want to actually say it, but the idea is that we're saying that Yosi, as a euphemism for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, should be Makeh, he should, destroy, curse, kill Yosi, which is another euphemism for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, what is this concept? This concept is, and it's very, it's brought out more clearly by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you're not saying anything significant if someone says about the being whom is reality that, this being should, this being should, something terrible should happen to that being, or, this being, and to say a curse or an insult. That doesn't do anything when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it doesn't even have any meaning when you're saying it when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The only thing that has meaning is if we say, Yake Yosi es Yosi. And what that really means is that you're essentially, what you're doing is, you are stating a metzius and a perspective and a making a statement that you want the entire atzmius of the thing to cease to exist, to implode. In other words, Yake Yosi es Yosi, Yosi being a euphemism for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is the idea of noikev. So in other words, noikev means you put a hole in it. You mamish, you make it that it's completely non-existent. So ara has an external mashmais. In other words, within the statement that I'm making when I'm cursing, I'm acknowledging the atzmius, the very existence of the thing that I'm cursing, but I'm saying that I want, or the person is saying that he wants that something negative should occur to the thing's existence, which is the subject of his curse. When you're noikev, it is essentially a statement in which you are expressing the idea and the curse that you don't want the thing to have existence, period. So you explicitly state the thing, and then you're noikev it, and you puncture a hole in it, meaning that you are saying that you don't want it to have existence b'chlal. And that is the idea of kava li. And that is why Rashi says that when Bilam says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ulchana kava li, what Bilam is saying is V'geirashti, Rashi says, min ha'olam, which means that within Bilam's, Balak just wants it to be that, perhaps Klal Yisrael would have fell in battle, and then they would have retreated, and would have gone somewhere else. Bilam wants it, V'geirashti min ha'olam. As far as he was concerned, it would be that Klal Yisrael would be completely wiped out, Rahman al-Tzad. That's for shalom. So, in his vision, it's the V'geirashti min ha'olam, from existence. And that's because that the taich of kava is the idea that you are creating a perspective, and you are saying a klala, a curse, which the content of is that you are making a statement that the thing should no longer exist. That's the idea of kava. And just to get an understanding of the koyach that Bilam actually had, and that is that this is not so pashut, but the simple understanding, the Gemara in Brachos says that Bilam was Yodeh Das Elyon. He knew the mind of the knowledge of Elyon, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Gemara says that obviously he didn't know Das Elyon. Nothing like that was true. So the Gemara explains that he was Yodeh L'Kavin Es HaSha'ah. He knew how to be mekavin, to figure out, to calculate the moment of za'am, of anger, or of completely unadulterated anger that Kaviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in a single day. And the Gemara has a whole cheshbon what that moment is, how long does it last, etc. But the Gemara says the koyach of Bilam was to access that one moment of unadulterated Kaviyachal anger that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has with the world, and he knew exactly when that was, and he cursed at that exact moment. What he was doing was he was essentially tapping in to the za'am, to the anger that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had at that moment, and through that would be the koyach to cause the obliteration of whoever was the subject of the za'am. And to give a taich, a simple taich, and that is that it's very clear if you look throughout the parsha and you look at the idea that Bilam was trying to go to different places and was trying to, he was building mizbachos and keneged avos, karbanos, etc., etc., etc. The idea was that, and this is true of klala in general, is that what klala really is a statement made based off a perspective generated by having an ayin hara. And the definition of ra, as he's spoken about till this time, is the reality of something being incomplete, and the ayin that sees that is someone who, when he perceives reality, he perceives it in terms of its flaws and negativities, rather than its positivities and breakdowns. And therefore, the concept of what Bilam was trying to do, and this is a Mishnah in Aבות, which we saw, Mefurish, that ayin ra'ah is mitamidav shel Bilam, which maybe we'll get time to explain what that means. But on this level, it means that Bilam was essentially trying to get a vantage point, and a literal and metaphysical vantage point onto Klal Yisrael, in which he finds a flaw, a reason, a point of non-completeness, and he magnifies that flaw and brings it to the forefront, kaviyachol, through the access to the one moment of being zayim, and then if he says a klala, then that will cause destruction. And that is essentially what Bilam was trying to do. In other words, he's trying to paint a picture of a lack of completion or a negativity of Klal Yisrael, and mekaven that in the Shah that Kadosh Baruch Hu is Zayim, and then make do a curse. That's how it works. And the taich of the Kel Zayim B'chol Yayim is, simply speaking, this very inyan, which is that Rashi says in the parshas Bereshis that HaKadosh Baruch Hu originally wanted to create the world b'midas hadin, and the taich of midas hadin is that the midas hadin demands that any given thing should be at its final form of completion, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw that Rosh She'ein El Miskayim, so therefore he's mishatif, he was chayzer as mishatif midas harachim, which means that, simply speaking, in the normal way that Kaviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to the world, or not really Kaviyachal, but the way that he relates to the world is as a Rachman. In other words, there's progress, there's things that are going forward, people are developing, the world develops in a certain direction, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it works within that, more lax timeline of development for things to get to where they're meant to be, which will accumulate in din. But there is apparently a period of time, which is a moment within the day, in which in that moment exists the manner in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to that world in that moment is that of din, is that of total and complete demand of the world to be in its sense of total completion. And therefore, in that moment, if you do point out a flaw, that will be a reason for eradication. Because in that moment, and in the Kel Zayim, in the moment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Zayim, what is happening is that he is relating to the world in a manner in which he relates to it to the extent that it is complete, to the extent that it has accomplished its midas hadin aspect. And if you can be makaven that shah and paint a picture and perspective of why it is that the thing that you're cursing is not within completion of din, then that could be a reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol be Zayim on that thing, and then it will lose its existence. That's the simple understanding of the taich, of the koyach, of what Bilam was, and what he was able to do. And the concept is that ma kavod le kabar kel. That is really the idea. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu in those days, according to the Gemara, was not Zayim. In other words, he did not relate in the pure midas hadin sense at any point, because of the fact that Bilam was, knew the moment, and he was trying to use that. He was trying to use that moment to curse the Jewish people. And we'll finish off with this: the taich, the understanding of the reality of what it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not Zayim. He did not get upset. And this is all in Gemaras, if anybody wants, I'd like to show it. The reason that he was not Zayim in those days is the manner in which that actually works is that the Za'am of HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have to, the way that it would have to work is that it would work in a manner, meaning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be Zayim on an entity which is separate from himself. Meaning that there is a world, and that world is, separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then if that world is incomplete, then in the moment of Zam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be upset, and if you give a Kav Neshah, then you can cause the eradication of the thing which is not complete. But that would only be true if it hadn't been that the Jewish people hadn't already had someone whom invested in a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the point of Shvuah, which means that they have become the shluchim, the very expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not zoyim on them because they are an expression of the very, they're an expression of Him, that's Him in the world. In other words, they are His shluchim. And that is really the idea of the concept over here, which is throughout the parsha, that the avos were makadim bilam. I'll just show you the one example, which I think is an expression of this idea. And he says over here that it says Vayakam bilam abakir vayachavosh es asona velech mitzrayim maya. Rashi says Mikan she'asina megakelos ashura shechabash hu ba'atmai Ama Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Kadosh Baruch Hu said Rasha kevar kadmecha Avraham Aviem shene'amar vayashkim Avraham babakir vayachavosh chamar. Now, in that pasuk, Rashi says that he says the opposite. He says Mikan hu ba'atmai tibalech me'avada Mikan. He says Shehahava mikakelos ashura. So in other words, they're exact opposites. Avram's act of going to, in his mind, sacrifice Yitzchak for HaKadosh Baruch Hu was an act of love that he had for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Bilam's act was an act of hate that he had for the Jewish people. And the Maisa of the Chavisha, of the Chamor, the fact that Avram Avinu himself saddled his own donkey on the way to sacrifice Yitzchak, was an idea of a preemptive Hagana, simply speaking, of the Jewish people, and that is Rashi saying over here. And over there you have that. So essentially what's happening is that and this is very well known for sure in the Maisa Akeda, as you reference the Maisa Akeda every year on Rosh Hashanah, and some people do it every day, as a schus for Klal Yisrael to miskayim, to last, etc. And that is because of the fact that Hagufa, that is what was going on in the Maisa Akeda. And the fact that Avram Avinu was not meharher HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he didn't ask any questions, but he loved HaKadosh Baruch Hu so much that he did whatever he asked without being mahar after him. That the result of that is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a shvuah, and this is true factually. In other words, in the end of the Akeda, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a shvuah to Avram Avinu that his children would get Eretz Yisrael, etc., etc. And that shvuah essentially represents the fact that there is a bris, there is a tying, there is an inherent connection between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Jewish people, as we are the expressions of reality. In other words, since the deepest truth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that He is reality, and we are expressions of that as well, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not get angry. In other words, He did not have a point in which He demanded total completion of us at any point during those days, due to the fact that Bilam would have used it. That is because of the fact that we were a chelik of Matthias, due to the fact that Avraham Avinu created the bris with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Maisa of the Akeda. Shabbos.